So I've had the Z6III for a while now, and I've come to know it as kind of a noisy sensor, but I have never been more wrong in my life. I was just shooting wrong. So I got kind of sick of having some of the noise that I was seeing on some of my shoots, and honestly, it wasn't that bad, to be fair. But I know I was using a gray card, I was exposing perfectly, so I was like, this should not have the amount of noise that it does. So I decided to run some camera tests. So I figured I did some research on how to properly convert like actual stops in DaVinci Resolve, and I found some interesting stuff, my fellas. This is going to change the way you shoot your camera, and your images are going to be so much cleaner in the shadows. So let's get right into it. Okay, so I have 6 different shots here in DaVinci that I want to talk about. 3 of them are from Nikon RAW, 3 of them are from H.265. We're going to talk about RAW first because it was the easiest workflow. So if you look at this shot, this is perfect exposure. I had the zebras set at 95 with a gray card with a range of 5. That is what Nikon recommends and what I no longer recommend after this test. This is a shot 1 stop overexposed, and this is a shot 2 stops overexposed. I have the red film bias offset LUT on it to convert to Rec 709. I have a color space transform here as well. It's the same. I just like the look of the red LUT. I thought it looked good. For RAW, all you have to do is go in here, make sure you have clip selected, and then everything else can be as shot, Rec 2020, Nikon N-Log. And then all you have to do is drop your exposure to, well, this one would be -2. And this one would be -1. If we open up our waveforms and we select all 3 of these, you can see that they're all the same height on the waveform. Maybe slight variances, but not enough to even matter. And honestly, that looks like it's in the shadows anyway, and it's probably from just being cleaned up a little bit. I don't know that for sure. Don't quote me on it. So these are the 3 different shots from NRAW. This is perfect exposure. This is right on where Nikon recommends with a gray card. Look how noisy the shadows are. I mean, there's no noise reduction, so it's not out of the ordinary. People are planning on putting noise reduction in RAW clips anyway. But if we move to the next clip, this is 1 stop overexposed. You can already see that we've cleaned up the shadows a ton here. And if we move to 2 stops overexposed, there's almost no noise. Obviously, that's capped because there's always going to be noise because there's a noise floor, especially when you have scenes this dark. But I'll show you all 3 of them next to each other. Just let them play. You guys can pixel peep a little bit. Look how much cleaner the ones that are overexposed by a stop and 2 stop are. Obviously, this works with NRAW, but how does it work with H.265? Because I don't shoot everything in NRAW, believe it or not. Most of my clients can't afford to store that. I can't afford to store that, so I shoot most of my stuff in Nikon's H.265 10-bit codec. I tested it with that as well, so I wanted to show you guys what was happening. And there's a little bit of a different process with H.265 versus log because you don't have the camera raw capabilities when you shoot in H.265. Here's the perfect exposure. Here's 1 stop over, and here's 2 stops over. If you want to accurately match your other exposures, you're going to go into your HDR wheels. Most people just drop this down to -1 and be like, oh, that must be it. But that's not quite it. There's one more step. You go to these 3 dots here, and you can see gamma and color space. So if you put your color space at Rec 2020 and your gamma at Nikon N-Log, then DaVinci knows what to do with your camera footage because all cameras have a different log curve and stuff like that. So if you do that, then you lower it to -1, then it'll actually be like a 1-to-1 ratio, which we can see if we select this other clip. They are almost exactly the same. So that's for 1 stop, and then here's 2 stops. Like, I mean, it just looks blown out, right? Like you would never use it. And then when we turn on our little grade here, just down to -2. And once again, the only conversion I'm doing is with the red LUT from Nikon. Let's look at the difference here because there's obviously some noise reduction baked into H.265. So this is perfect exposure. This is one stop over. You can already see tremendous difference. And two stops over. Even more of a difference. Now we'll show all three of them together. And I'll just let that play so you guys can pixel peep a bit. Hopefully YouTube doesn't compress this too bad. But on my screen, what I'm seeing right now is an immense increase in detail in the shadows, and the noise just drops off significantly. Kind of the workflow that I did to set this exposure, I decided that I wanted to use the aperture of f2.8. Then I raised the aperture to 2 stops or 1 stop over, and you can do that by using 3 clicks on your camera. That's generally what 1 stop is, if I'm not mistaken. But I also know that 2.8 to f4 is 1 stop, and f4 to f5.6 is 1 stop. So I know that's 2 stops there. So I set my exposure correctly to f5.6 and then dropped my aperture to 2.8. That's how I got 2 stops over exactly. And then I did the same thing. I went from f4 to f2.8. Something that I need to mention is that this is in a very controlled environment. So we don't have a lot of like highlights that are blowing out in the background or anything like that. If you're going to expose to the right like this, 1 to 2 stops over, you need to be careful about your highlights. Make sure you don't clip them. That's the most important thing. You can do this a couple ways. I have a monitor. You can use false color to make sure you're not clipping there. And then you could also use your zebras. I believe the highlights on mine are set to 255 with a range of 5. You can go up to the zebras and then back off a click or two, and you'll be fine with your highlights. And if you're having trouble getting your gray card or your skin tones in front to 2 stops over, then you probably need a more powerful light, or you need to turn your light up to help combat those highlights that are in your scene. One more thing, you cannot do this with ISO. If you overexpose with ISO, all you're doing is raising your noise floor, and when you bring it back down in post, you're going to have the same amount of noise. So you have to do it with either increasing your light output, or you have to do it with your aperture or shutter speed. You have to actually physically let more light into your sensor, because ISO, you're raising your noise floor, you're not going to get the same results if you do it with ISO. Hopefully this helps. Let me know in the comments if you guys are going to try this on your next shoot, and we're going to catch you in the next one. This is a spider. This fluffy spider. We'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.